Your Legislators is made possible by the Minnesota Corn Growers Association. From developing best practices that help farmers better protect our natural resources to the latest innovations in corn-based plastics, Minnesota corn farmers are proud to invest in third-party research, leading to a more sustainable future for our local communities. Minnesota Farmers Union, standing for agriculture, working for farmers. On the web at mfu.org.
Good evening and welcome to Your Legislators. We're delighted that you have joined us for this evening of conversation about the issues that are facing Minnesota with a distinguished panel of guests who will help unravel the mysteries of St. Paul. My name is Barry Anderson and I'll be your host and moderator for the program this evening. This is your program and we invite you to call in with your questions at 800-726-3178, 800-726-3178, or you can send your questions via email at yourtv@pioneer.org, and our crack back office staff will see that the questions get to our panel. I want to remind you that we will be with you not only this week, but for all the rest of the weeks of the legislative session until the legislature goes home. And we've reached that time of year when we're beginning to see some action on some really interesting bills, and we're going to have an opportunity to discuss some of that this evening. In fact, the legislature's been so busy that we're at the moment we have two guests this evening. We may have three. We'll just have to wait and see if our third guest is able to join us, given the pressures and time commitments at the legislature. So let's begin this evening, as we do each week, by introducing our distinguished panel of guests and giving each of them an opportunity to tell us a little bit about themselves, their day job, how long they've served in the legislature, committees, and things of that sort. Both of our guests this evening have been with us on previous occasions, and we're delighted that they are joining us this evening as well. Let's begin with Senator Patricia Torres Ray from District 63 in Minneapolis. Senator Torres Ray, again, we're delighted to have the opportunity to visit with you this evening. Tell our viewers a little bit about yourself.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here tonight, and I hope my term is ending. I announced that I will not be running for Senate, but it has been my privilege to represent District 62 for so many years, 16 years. This is my 16th year in the Minnesota Senate, and my district includes parts of South Minneapolis and Ridgefield. So I am the only district that has predominantly urban area and part of suburban communities.
Can you tell us a little bit about some of your priorities this legislative session, committees that you think are particularly significant for our viewers?
Well, my district and the entire state of Minnesota are really hurting right now. We have many schools that are in deficit, so education really is the top priority in my district and the surrounding community. So the top priority for my constituents right now is to ensure that we invest the $9 billion that we have, the surplus, in education and dealing with some housing issues. As living in Minneapolis is very expensive today. So we have some, really big challenges with young people who are not able to afford to stay in the city, young families who cannot afford to get bigger homes. So if I am to pick, a couple of issues, I believe that those are really the most concerning to my district. And, the teacher salaries, people are incredibly concerned about the deficits that many schools have in the district right now. And we were able to come out of the, strike. The union was able to negotiate a contract, but it's not a very good contract. It's a small solution for now. The state really needs to step in and put more funding into the formula in order to resolve the challenges that we face.
We're going to have an opportunity to visit at greater length about those kinds of issues. So thank you very much for that introduction to those difficult topics. Also joining us this evening is Representative Tony Jurgens from District 54B, Cottage Grove. Representative Jurgens, introduce yourself to our viewers.
Thank you, Justice Anderson, and thank you for inviting me back. I mentioned before we went on the air that I ran into Senator Hoffman over at the Capitol when we finished up our House floor session, and I told him I was doing the program tonight, and I said, I think this is the first time I've done it without him. Normally, the other times I've been on, Senator Hoffman has been on as well. So uh, I'm happy to be back. I am from District 54B, which is Cottage Grove, Hastings, Afton, and the couple of surrounding townships. This is my third term in the House, and priorities that I had coming into the session. My party's in the minority, so my priorities might not be the same as what we're seeing on the House floor. But first and foremost, what I would like to see get done is Chapter 12 in statute, which is the statute that gives the governor his emergency powers. I think we saw through the COVID years from 2020 and 2021 how that statute really wasn't written for a pandemic. In fact, it was written over 20 years ago, and it's more for natural disasters and that sort of thing. I think that that's something that we as a legislature need to take a look at and adjust. Specifically, as we know that the governor was able to continue to renew his emergency powers every 30 days, and the legislature only had the power to take that away. I think that should be backwards. I think that in order to continue emergency powers, it should be that the legislature has to authorize it, otherwise it ends. Another priority, of course, is public safety. That's what I'm hearing in my district in the suburban area. It's not just Minneapolis and St. Paul that are seeing big crime increases. That's spilling out into the suburbs as well. I just saw on social media yesterday there was a pursuit that started in my district in Cottage Grove and ended I believe it was in St. Paul. And so the crime that we're seeing is spilling out into the suburbs with, you're seeing carjackings and car thefts, and people are stealing a car in one area and they're committing crimes with it, and then they're stealing another car to go home. And people want to be able to feel safe, not just in their neighborhoods, but they want to feel safe when they go into Minneapolis for a ball game or for a concert. So that's another priority. And then, of course, Senator Torres Ray mentioned the budget surplus. $9.2 billion plus federal money. We probably have 10, 11, $12 billion total. So there's no shortage of cash available for the next or the remainder of this biennium. And as we know, that's a forecast. It doesn't mean that we have $9 billion in the bank right now. The good news is last year at the very end of the special session, we did pass a full budget for the biennium. So nothing has to be done with that surplus. But there are no, as Senator Torres Ray knows, there is no shortage of people requesting something to be done. They have ideas on what we can do with that money, where we can spend it.
Sometimes, as our guests have observed, the challenge of surpluses can be as significant as the challenge of deficits. It's a complicated situation. Senator Torres Ray, let's start with the unemployment. Let's start with the floor action today at the legislature, the reinsurance issue, and maybe you could bring our viewers up to date on what that's about and what appears to have been the resolution of that issue today.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a very important vote. We have been trying to negotiate this deal between the House and the Senate and the governor. Today was actually our deadline. So it was incredibly important that we made a decision, and we did. So for the audience that may not remember, what this is, the Senate and the House had to agree that the state should continue to what we call the reinsurance program. And this is for companies that are in the individual healthcare market. So what we have today is Minnesota, what we call the Minnesota Premium Security Plan, and is designed to provide some stability to premiums that are paid by individuals like you. And it offers, so the state of Minnesota pays for part of those premiums, right? So we offer the insurance companies in the individual market when the premiums are so high, we pay part of it. So we had to agree. So they are in a deficit, and we had to agree to provide actually $1.1 billion in order to uh, just put the money that is necessary to protect people who are in the individual market. I didn't vote for the bill. I know the importance for many people, but I believe that we've done this before. We have been replenishing this account in those numbers, billions, for a number of years, and we have to stop. We really need to offer universal healthcare coverage, and we need to pay for that. It's more expensive, but over time, I think that Minnesota needs to offer healthcare to everyone. And right now, what we're doing is subsidizing companies, subsidizing the insurance companies. They are the recipients of this funding, and they're making a lot of money. We have CEOs of health partners and others that are, having salaries that are something that I cannot imagine. So they manage these companies, make a tremendous amount of profit, tremendous amount of money, and we just gave $1.1 billion from taxpayers to these companies. So we need to stop that and offer an alternative. So in the Senate, we had a 46-20 vote, but the bill did pass.
Representative Jurgens, your thoughts on the reinsurance bill and the results in the House?
So just a little bit more about what reinsurance does. It's insurance for insurance. It's a pool of money where the highest claims, the largest claims, get paid from. If we don't do that, and the insurance companies pay out those large claims, then what they do is they raise the premiums on the individual. So this isn't a bailout. I disagree with the senator in that respect. It's not money that's going to the insurance companies. The beneficiaries of it are the policyholders. Without this reinsurance, there's the premiums would get, or the claims would be paid out of the pool of funds, while the insurance companies then, what are they going to do? They have to replenish those funds. They raise premiums. When I ran for office the first time in 2016, that was a top issue that I heard going door to door, was the cost of healthcare or health insurance premiums. And in 2017, Representative Davids was the chief author in the House for the bill that created this reinsurance program. And the thing is, it worked. Rather than having double-digit premium increases, we actually saw that stabilized, and the increases were much smaller. In some cases, they were decreases. And without the reinsurance program, it's very likely that sector, the individual insurance, health insurance market, would have collapsed. Now that's less than 10% of Minnesotans, but if a major portion of the program of health insurance programs were to have collapsed, it would have been a spiral and potentially taken down other aspects, small business claims and that sort of thing. So it has worked. I'm glad that we got this passed today. This was a deadline. We had to have it reauthorized by April 1st in order to continue the program. It was funded for 3 years, and the reauthorization was for 5 years. So that just means that we went to the federal government to reauthorize the program. And so we know that it's going to be in place for the next 5 years, which is a good thing. It stabilizes the market. And then it's something that even at the federal level, last year when we were debating this topic, we know that Representative Angie Craig and Senator Klobuchar had both spoken out in favor of similar programs at the national level. Other states looked at what Minnesota did and tried to replicate it because bottom line is it worked. It brought premiums down, brought the increases down when we needed it back in 2017.
So, as I understand it, procedurally, the bill has now, the same bill passed both the House and the Senate, and it goes to the governor. Is that where we're at? And I think the governor's been involved in these conversations as well. Am I right about this?
Yes, I expect it.
Senator Torres Ray, I'll ask you. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that
So,
is correct. So we had to make a decision, in both houses. So the negotiations were conducted yesterday, and the governor participated on that. So the agreement came out yesterday, and we voted both in the House and the Senate. So it will be going to the governor.
So let's talk a little bit about the. I started out to mention the unemployment piece and probably confused our viewers by moving to reinsurance. So let's talk about that the unemployment trust fund issues. Let's start with you, Representative Jurgens. I know that's been a concern as well, and that's been delayed in part because of this discussion here, the reinsurance program. Or at least the governor so indicated today. Can you bring our viewers up to date on where that issue stands?
We're still waiting for that to be resolved, unfortunately. So back in 2020 and 2021, the unemployment trust fund, that's the account that unemployment benefits are paid from. Many more Minnesotans found themselves unemployed as a result of the pandemic. That fund was depleted. It was in the negative, over $1 billion. And when that happens, the federal government bails us out, basically. And we've been paying interest of about $50,000 a day to the federal government to bring that back up to flush. The Senate passed a bill, maybe Senator Torres Ray can remember how long ago. It was a bipartisan bill over a month ago. Unfortunately, in the House, we haven't seen a similar bill. There was a deadline of March 15th where, as a result of not passing a bill that would replenish that, bring it up to zero, and then fully fund it for unemployment claims going forward, if that wasn't done by March 15th, then automatically payroll tax increases kick in. And so every employer in the state of Minnesota, starting on March 15th, a couple of weeks ago, is now paying higher unemployment, or rather payroll taxes, to pay back the unemployment trust fund. There's no reason why we shouldn't have gotten this done 2 weeks ago. Unfortunately, now by increasing the payroll taxes, if we do finish this, if we do get it done, then the Department of Employment and Economic Development will have to go back and try to figure out how to credit those businesses that have been paying the higher payroll taxes. I'm on the Workforce and Business Development Committee, and assistant commissioner to Department of Employment and Economic Development said before that deadline that it was crucial that we resolve this by March 15th, because not doing so would be unprecedented, and it would be extremely difficult for them to manage and figure out how to credit those increases from the payroll taxes. And here we are now at the end of the first quarter, where businesses are having to pay that in, and we still don't have a resolution on it. What I think the House should have done is what the Senate did: work in a bipartisan manner, pass that bill, pay back the federal government using actually federal ARP money, money that we got from the federal government for COVID reasons. That this is an eligible use of those funds, and also use general fund surplus dollars, pay back the debt, and then fully fund it, so that when Minnesotans find themselves unemployed and file for unemployment, that those funds are there for them.
Senator Torres Ray, your thoughts on the unemployment trust fund issues?
Well, I think that the significant difference is about how we pay for that. And so the difference of opinion that we have is, how do we replenish the funding of the fund, right? I think that both bodies, the House and the Senate, want to do it. What we are proposing, what the minority in the Senate and the majority in the House are proposing, is that we have to pay in, so that the fund will have ongoing funding. And what the majority in the Senate and the minority in the House want to do is pay that with COVID dollars. And so that will be, we don't fix the problem. That's the major challenge we have right now. So with the COVID dollars that we have, we may be able to, sustain this for a while, but we don't have a solution. We have to pay in. We have to figure out a solution. And these formulas, these are some of the challenges that we face right now with some of the proposals that we have before us by the majority in the Senate. That, we solve the situation for a year or two, and then we have to come back to it because we are not really structurally fixing the problem by providing the revenue that these programs need to stay in place. And that's the major difference. I think that we both agree that it needs to be done. I think that the challenge right now is how it gets done, where the money comes from is the main problem we have.
Well, if I could just
go ahead, Representative Jurgens.
I could just add to that. The proposal in the House was not to fully fund it. It was only to bring it back to zero and then increase the payroll taxes in order to replenish the fund going forward. And in normal business operations, that fund does work as it's supposed to. The reason why it was depleted was because of COVID. And so that's why I think that using COVID dollars to replenish it makes perfect sense.
Last word on that, Senator Torres Ray?
It's an important thing to understand, right? Because on one hand, you would think, that obviously going through a pandemic for 2 years will cost any state a lot of money. But we have a deficit, and we really repayment may take us to a certain point of a stability. But I think the calculation that has been offered is not sustaining, that we do have to increase. We have to replenish, and then we have to increase the payment in order to sustain it over time. So I think it needs to. My understanding is that in order to correct the problem structurally for the future, not only do we need to replenish with COVID dollars, because we're going to have to do some of that, of course, after the pandemic, but also structurally for the future, we just have to increase the payments.
So let's move on to some questions that we have from our viewers on some other topics. I just want to remind our viewers that sometimes we'll get questions that particular legislators have some background in, and occasionally we'll run into questions where they aren't. These issues aren't appearing in committees that our guests this evening are currently serving on, and so sometimes we can help with these questions, sometimes we can't. But anyway, we have a viewer who is remarking on a conversation we had with legislators very early in the session about the chronic wasting disease issue as it relates to deer. And this viewer notes that another deer with CWD had been found in the Grand Rapids area, I believe, and was wondering if there had been any traction on moving forward on that issue. I'm going to pick on you, Representative Jurgens. I don't know that you're our expert on CWD tonight, but at least to start with, we're making you our expert. What can you tell us, if anything, about this?
I can assure you, I'm not the expert on that. I've not. None of the committees that I'm on have heard any chronic wasting disease bills. The discussion that I've heard on the topic is very high level, I guess, and just the fact that the cervid farms that where folks are raising deer, and the fear that the deer in the wild are going to infect their stock. So I know that this is a question that comes up on your program frequently, and I don't have a lot of knowledge in that area.
Senator Torres Ray, any thoughts on CWD and related issues?
Well, I am in the same place. I don't know much about it, but what I understand is that the Department of Natural Resources made a request on behalf of the governor for addressing the issue, and is part of the proposal that the governor put before the legislature. We are very, very concerned. We're surrounded. All of the states around us have a significant problem that they have not been able to contain it, and so it is very unfortunate because in the Senate we provided $0 to the to the solutions that were presented by the executive branch. So unfortunately, in my bill, DNR came to testify and presented, the problem that we face right now. But there was no decision that we didn't include that. Actually, none of the governor's proposals were included in the environment bill, and this had a request for funding to address it. So it's very unfortunate that the governor was not able to really get the support in the Senate to do work related to CWA.
So we have another question from a viewer about property taxes. It's interesting, the years that I have had the privilege of serving as the host and moderator of this program, this question comes up with a fair amount of regularity, and it's reappeared again this year. And this viewer is concerned particularly about elderly individuals and the possibility that they might be forced from their homes as a result of increasing property taxes. And this viewer wonders if that is something that the legislature is going to be dealing with in this term. So let's start with you, Senator Torres Ray. Residential property taxes. What can you tell us about that in terms of action at the legislature?
My understanding is that we're going to see a tax bill coming from the majority that is a lot of tax cuts. It may include some property taxes. I do not know. But I believe that one of their priorities is to cut taxes for businesses that were impacted, of course, by COVID and, the economy. So that's something that they want to do. They have some agreement with the governor. The governor agrees with that. But I think that the problem that we have with some of the ideas that have been presented in the Senate is that they really don't offer a solution to take care of our budget after we, deal with this. To give you an example, right now, we have a number of school districts that are coming to us with a deficit. They need an increase in the formula for students. And we're not offering right now to take care of the deficit that they are facing that is immediate. So if we adopt these tax cuts that the majority in the Senate are proposing, the future for schools and healthcare and infrastructure in the state of Minnesota is very problematic because we create a hole in the budget that we will not be able to fix. So I am very reluctant to accept that, right now, because we have the surplus, we're presenting it as a solution to deal with taxes. It is not a solution to deal with ongoing, fiscal issues. We pay basically healthcare and education. 87% of our budget goes to pay for healthcare and education that comes from tax dollars. So we cannot pay with, one-time money, which is this surplus that we have right now, for these ongoing expenses of the state of Minnesota. So I think it's a proposal that is not very wise. And I don't know what the solution is for ongoing. I don't know if we will come back in a year and say, hey, now we have to increase taxes because we don't have the money to pay, for education. Education is a very, very significant issue in Minnesota right now. We're not paying attention. We have been in deficits, since the Plenty administration, when we had these deep cuts to education, and we have not been able to recover ever since. So I am very reluctant to accept this notion that we can move into tax cuts for anybody, really, at this point. The governor, I think, is entertaining some tax cuts for perhaps the population that you mentioned, but I think it's going to be very difficult to get some of us on board with that.
So, Representative Jurgens, the property tax relief question more specifically, and then more generally, where do you see the tax issue going? And perhaps we can have some exchange with Senator Torres Ray on this as well. We can spend a little time on this question because I think it's probably, the question of tax relief, property tax relief, but taxes generally, and how we handle the surplus is something that's very much front and center this session. So your thoughts on that, Representative Jurgens?
Well, property taxes directly come from or to fund the school districts, local city taxes, and county taxes. Indirectly, of course, as Senator Torres Ray said, what the state doesn't fund, local taxes need to pick up on that. And as an example with education, our budget is, I think, 44. I think it's 44% of our general fund budget goes to education. That's about $9 billion a year. And of course, funding schools is a partnership between federal, state, and local. So that's how that splits out. As far as taxes in general, well, I'm going to put a plug in as long as we're talking about it. I'm the chief author in the House for the bill that would eliminate state income taxes on all Social Security benefits. I've been the chief author now this is the second term that I've had that bill. I'm hopeful that we can finally get that done this year. We're one of only 12 states that still taxes Social Security benefits. I think that that's a tax that we should eliminate, like the other 38 states have done. As far as other taxes, this budget surplus at over $9 billion is, the state of Minnesota has never seen anything like that. But being in my third term, we have had a budget surplus every biennium that I've been here. So I think that some permanent tax cuts is someplace that we can look. Now, the budget surplus, a lot of that is a result of one-time money. There was so much federal money that came in during COVID that resulted in higher sales tax, higher payroll taxes, and corporate taxes. So that's why we're seeing such a large budget deficit. And what we want to be careful, or budget surplus, I should say, we want to be careful of new programs that go on into the future if we're not certain that the income is going to continue. So we have to be cautious about it. We don't have to do. It's not like we have to account for all $9 billion. The budget was set last year. We don't need to reopen those books necessarily. The one thing, as I said, though, that I would like to finally get done this year is the bill to eliminate state income taxes on Social Security benefits for our seniors.
Let me pursue a point that Senator Torres Ray made that I think deserves some conversation. She notes that a significant part of this money is one-time money. It's a little unclear to me exactly how much of the $9 billion surplus, plus of course additional federal money, which is obviously one-time money, is in fact one-time. Do we know? And does that affect the calculation here? I've seen estimates of 40%, and then north of 40% is one-time money. It seems to me we probably need to know what that figure is before we can decide what we're going to do next, right?
Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is really a top priority. And I think we're not clear on that. Unfortunately, we have not had, good conversations about that in committee. But senators are trying to figure out, and I think as these bills move to the floor, we're going to have a better chance of asking those questions and go through those proposals. But without understanding the proportion of what is ongoing money, and my understanding is that most of it isn't, it's very hard to really talk to our constituents about tax cuts, in whatever direction. I think there is a conversation about Social Security, and people are very excited because obviously we have a lot of people who are retiring. And so it's very popular to say, well, you don't have to pay taxes on the state portion for your Social Security income. I think that's very attractive. People want to hear that. And well, so if we have one-time money, this will be this year that we give you, a few pennies, and next year we go back. That's just not a good proposal. We just cannot tell taxpayers that that's how we're going to handle, the fiscal future of our state. But we do not know. I personally don't know what the proportion is in terms of ongoing funding and one time.
Representative Jurgens, your thoughts on that?
Well, the benefit to the seniors would be a little more than pennies. It would be about $1,100 on average for the seniors. But you bring up a good point. We don't know exactly what the future is going to look like. And keep in mind, I said it at the beginning, that $9.2 billion budget surplus, that's a forecast. That's what the forecasters believe the state will have at the end of the biennium, June 30th of 2023. A lot of things can happen between now and then. And even since then, we're seeing inflation go up. That could have an impact both on the plus side and the minus side. If inflation goes up, well, then the cost of goods go up, and maybe you're going to see an increase in sales tax as a result of that. But on the other hand, you're going to see people perhaps spending less. So we don't really know what the impact of that of inflation is going to have on this forecasted surplus. Since then, the war in the Ukraine, what impact is that going to have, if any, on the budget forecast? So there are a lot of unknowns, and that's why I don't, we're going to get our budget targets in the next coming days for in the House of Representatives, and I don't think that it would be wise to spend $9.2 billion when we're not certain that we're going to have that at the end of this biennium.
We've got a question
I
from a
agree
viewer
with
who
that, and I think
Oh,
that
go ahead.
one of the issues that is clear, is that the governor really proposed a more transparent proposal, right? Because he said, well, let's give people a check. If we have this money and we're going to give it, we want to give it to taxpayers, let's write a check. But I think this whole notion that the majority in the Senate is proposing, the minority in the House is proposing, that we are just going to have these tax cuts, it gives the impression that somehow we're giving this money and we're going to continue to give it to you. And that's not true. That is not true. This is not a tax cut. This is not, we're just giving you a one-time money. And the governor has said, well, if that's the case, well, let's send a check. And let's send a check to those people that need it most right now. And so I think that we need more transparency in this conversation, because how we present this issue to Minnesotans really, really matter. To tell people that you're going to have a tax relief when you really are not offering that but one-time money, we just have to say, this is one-time money. Whether you want to spend all of it in one-time money and do some one-time projects, we have a lot of infrastructure projects. I hope that we're able to invest in that are one-time. We can take care of a lot of our problems right now that we have with infrastructure. We have we're going to do a bonding bill, but bonding is a very different proposal. And we have this money that is ours that we can spend in local communities in every region of the state of Minnesota, generate a lot of jobs and income for the state. But that's not what this proposal actually is.
I want to give you a chance, Representative Jurgens, to talk a little bit about the governor's piece of this, because he, from the very start of the session, has talked about a direct rebate to taxpayers. And what's your response to Senator Torres Ray's description of that program?
Well, I think the governor's program is nothing more than an election year gimmick, especially naming the checks after himself. I think what Minnesotans want, and I think what Minnesotans deserve, is permanent tax relief, not just a one-time check.
Opportunity to discuss this in greater detail as the weeks unfold. Let's move to some other questions that viewers have provided for us this evening. We have a viewer who's very concerned about what can be done to increase help for mental health facilities that serve children in Minnesota. This viewer notes that there are staffing shortages, but of course, in addition to the staffing shortages, there are also programmatic shortages. One of the programs aimed at providing mental health care for children actually comes from the Hutchinson Hospital system, where I practiced law for many years. That's one of the few outstate centers that are available for mental health for kids. And so the question becomes, is that on the radar screen at all? Let's start with you, Representative Jurgens. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it definitely is, and it should be. That's such a key factor with so many other areas of our society, and being able to diagnose and address mental health issues, especially with children. We've dealt with that in my family, and as parents, my wife and I sometimes didn't know where to turn, and when we finally did figure that out, it just made a world of difference for our daughter, and she's open about that, so I'm not telling any secrets by talking about that here, but that's something that I know is a challenge for parents. And I was a chief author of a bill last biennium, I think it was, to increase funding for schooling mental health, which is a program that links the mental health professionals with the schools and picks up where the schools maybe don't have enough staff or they don't have quite the support that the children need, and linking those together. So there are things that we can do from a funding standpoint, and I think that's such an important issue because, like I said, it impacts families. It impacts their schoolwork, their children's schoolwork. It impacts parents and their ability to work. And so we need to continue to address that. I'm a full supporter of that.
Senator Torres Ray, your thoughts on that issue?
I fully agree with Representative Jurgens, and I think people in Minnesota are really asking us to work in a bipartisan way, and they're trying to help us find those issues that could bring us together. I really believe that mental health is one of those issues, and every single one of us represents right now districts that are really impacted, families that have been impacted by COVID. Having kids at home that they are not able to stay with because they have to go to work, the trauma, the significant impact that this pandemic has had on children, particularly. And so I think that this is an area where we are going to come together. My understanding is that in the Senate, the majority is very concerned about mental health, and they really want to do a major investment, and that is coming. So my hope is that we will find some consensus on that, and how it will be spent or distributed, I don't know, but I do understand that this is a top priority, and so Minnesotans will be, I think, very pleased to see that the proposal in both houses may include some significant funding for mental health.
Well, very good. Let's move on to one of the constitutional duties for the legislature in the so-called short session of the legislature, the off-year session, whatever we may call it. And that, of course, is the bonding bill. And this is an ongoing discussion. Let's start with you, Representative Jurgens. What do you think is going to happen with the bonding bill? Are there projects that you're particularly concerned about? Tell us what your view on that is, and then we'll give Senator Torres Ray an opportunity and have a little discussion about this. Floor is yours.
Well, this term, I'm not on the Capital Investment Committee. I was for my first two terms, and that's still an area that is of great interest to me. We don't know yet what the bonding bill is going to look like. There are different rumors of numbers that are coming out, and the governor has his target number, and the Republicans in the Senate have their target number, and in the House there's a different number. So it'll all come together probably at the very end. What I would like to see done is a combination of cash and borrowing, with the budget surplus, again, getting back to one-time funding. That would be a perfect use for it. I actually have a bill that would spend $1.76 billion, but it would to eliminate debt. There's stadium bonds, tobacco bonds. It would pay both of those off. It would pay off when you bond for projects. You can only refinance those bonds every 10 years. So any of those projects that are in that 10-year window, I would pay those off with this bill. And then any projects that were approved in a prior bonding bill, but the bonds have not yet been sold, rather than take on the debt, it would pay for those in cash as well. And the total of that is $1.76 billion, which is a lot of money, but it would save hundreds of millions of dollars in debt service going forward on that. As far as projects, there's a project, it's not my project, but I'm the chief author in the House. It's actually one of the governor's priorities. It's for the Hastings Veterans Home. The Hastings Veterans Home is on a beautiful campus on the Vermilion River in Hastings. But the buildings, there's about 6 buildings total, and many of them are over 100 years old. The main building was built as a hospital for the mentally ill back in 1903 or something like that. They really are beyond their useful life, and they looked at what would it take to bring those up to not necessarily up to code, but to make them more useful, and it would be throwing good money after bad. So the proposal is to build a brand new house or Hastings Veterans Home on that campus. That's about a $60 million project from the state, and it would also require about $135 million from the federal government. So that's a top priority for me. There's the Dakota County jail is looking at an addition, and they are seeking about $1 million for the planning and design for that. And that would actually house inmates that have mental health issues or substance abuse issues, and then a wing for female, specifically for female inmates as well. So those are a couple of things that I'm tracking. I don't know. I would, if I were to guess, and it would only be a guess, I would say that a bonding bill, when it does come through towards the end of session, is probably going to be in about the $1 billion range, maybe a little heavier than that. But how that breaks down between borrowing and cash, that will has yet to be determined.
Senator Torres Ray, bonding issues.
Yes, well, we have some agreement here too with Representative Jurgen. I do believe that we need to have cash projects available. I think that local communities are really asking for cash programs, for cash for some of their projects that are just really critical to their community. So I am a big supporter of that. Unfortunately, in the Senate, it's my understanding that Senator Bach is announcing that he will not have cash projects included in his bill. So that will be really very, very unfortunate. And I have some I have a delegation, so I have the privilege to work with the Minneapolis delegation. There's 15 of us trying to figure out how do we support projects that are in the city that are really projects that serve people statewide. And that's one of the greatest challenges that we have in the city of Minneapolis, that a lot of our bonding projects are for buildings or projects that serve the entire state, not just the city. And the same is true for Hennepin County. But by far, for the city, the central city stormwater system, the stormwater tunnel, is a big problem. The city has come to us multiple times to ask for that. We have some aging tunnels that need to be replaced, and it's a very expensive proposal for the city. So they keep coming to us to ask us for that. We also have some significant problems with public buildings that need to transition for a plan of implementation with the federal regulations with ADA. And we have old buildings in our city, and it's a very expensive proposal for the city and the county to update doors and elevators. And so we are behind with that, and they have a proposal to do that. Hennepin County has something very interesting that apparently is, supported statewide, because we're going to do an experiment that will be really viewed nationally as the first in the country, which is to build an anaerobic digester. So people know that we do a very good job around here in the county, the city, collecting garbage. And we have people have been doing this, collecting waste and separating organics and recycling. And we have now a situation where we have a volume that is coming from homes that we need to dispose. And so there is a study, there is a project to really do that, and hopefully try to implement it statewide. But we have the volume in Hennepin County to be able to do that. So they are very excited about proposing that to the state of Minnesota, so that we can begin to do that in every county. And we are also very strongly supporting some of the housing ideas that are coming forward. I have a veterans home I have a veterans project in Richfield that is very important to me for building housing for veterans that are, really we have a significant problems with veterans that are not able to afford a home. And we have our delegation feels very important that we have to put funding into state parks. We loved our parks intensely during the pandemic. Everybody was in the parks, even working or recreating, and it was very tough. DNR gave a presentation of how parks and trails really suffer as a result of the volume of people who were using the parks during these 2 years, and we did not increase their funding. And so now they are having to really fix all of these problems that we have in our parks and trails, and they do not have the sufficient funding to do it. And I think this trend is going to continue. I really love the idea that Minnesotans are, enjoying the outside. We have the most beautiful lakes and parks. We're famous for that. But unfortunately, we don't have enough funding for that. So some people are coming to us to really request, and bonding is kind of a different issue. This is mostly DNR and legacy money that people are asking for, but we also have facilities that are outdated. And, the Med Council is talking about really the infrastructure that is suffering right now, and why we need to address it.
If I could,
So, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Representative Jurgens.
a couple of things that Senator Torres Ray said. First of all, I agree that any bonding bill, it will be heavy on infrastructure. I mean, that's the idea behind that. And we're talking wastewater treatment plants and higher education asset preservation, like at the U of M and through the Minsky system, like maybe a chemistry lab, for example. And Senator Torres Ray mentioned the storm sewers in Minneapolis. When I was on the Capital Investment Committee a few years ago on the bonding tour, I actually was 90 feet below the streets of Minneapolis taking a look at those storm sewers to see the cracking that was taking place in there. And those are over 100 years old. So I saw firsthand what that need looks like. Unfortunately, that year, the city of Minneapolis prioritized an entertainment complex in the Upper Harbor as their number one priority, and the storm sewers was the number two priority. And so I questioned that at the time, that was the storm sewers basic infrastructure, and should have been probably prioritized higher than an entertainment complex. But Senator, I saw that with my own eyes, and I see the need for the upgrades to the storm sewers in Minneapolis. And as far as the parks, the metro regional parks, it's kind of there aren't really state parks in the metro area. So the metro's version of the parks is the metro regional parks. And every year they ask for maybe $10 million, and they might get 5. And what they do get from the state is matched on a 3 to 5 basis or something like that from the Met Council. I actually recommended to them this year that because of the surplus and one-time money, that this would be a year that they should request even more. And I believe their request this year is, if I'm not mistaken, $30 million. And that would help take care of some of the backlog that they have in the parks. And that's the Three Rivers Park, it's Dakota County, it's Washington County. And so that I agree with the senator in that respect as well, that this might be a good year to get caught up on some of the backlog in the parks throughout the metro area. And what we saw during COVID is the usage of the parks has increased so much because it's something that families can do to get outside and spend time together, spend time in the outdoors. So I think that would be another good use of one-time funding.
Senator Torres Ray, I want to give you the opportunity. We may have a couple remaining questions that we'll be able to get to at the end of the program, but we're running here towards the end of the program. This will be most likely your last program with us. You're retiring from the legislature, as you said. I've tried to give everyone who's leaving the legislature at the end of this term, obviously the term runs till the end of the year, but I mean, this will be your final term. And I'd like to give you a couple of minutes to tell our viewers what you appreciated about your service, ways in which you think the legislature could be improved, and whatever you'd like to say is sort of an opportunity to recognize your service over 16 years to the people of your Senate district. If you could do that for us now, I'd really appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to thank my constituents and my district. I have had a privilege to work with a community and to represent a community that has supported me for 16 years. So it has been a partnership of joy. My district is a very active district. Actually, there was a measure that was put in the Senate about who receives more calls and emails, and I was number one. So I get a lot of contact from my district and a lot of support and ideas. I have a lot of bills that I have put together with ideas from my constituents. They have guided me and helped me do this work, and I am incredibly grateful. So, serving in the Senate has been really a tremendous privilege for me and a lifetime opportunity. I am very grateful for everything that I've done in the Senate, my colleagues, and everyone. Um, the disappointments for me personally are that we've not been able to address some of the great disparities that exist in this state. I ran for office because I believe very deeply that we have the resources to address the deep inequalities that exist in the state of Minnesota. And so prior to coming, to the Senate, I was working on those issues, and I ran for office, hoping to come and be a voice inside of the Senate, inside of the legislature. And I feel that we are not making progress. We have some of the greatest disparities in housing, healthcare, and education in the country. So
And
Minnesota needs to
I'm
do
going to give you
better.
15 seconds to finish up, if you would, please, and then we're going to be done for the evening. Very quickly, anything else?
No, I think that's it.
Senator Torres Ray, thank you for your appearances on this program. Senator Representative Jurgens, thank you for joining us this evening. My thanks to you, the viewers, for being with us. I invite you to return with us next week and all the weeks that follow until the legislature goes home. Thank you and good night.
Your Legislators is made possible by the Minnesota Corn Growers Association. From developing best practices that help farmers better protect our natural resources to the latest innovations in corn-based plastics, Minnesota corn farmers are proud to invest in third-party research, leading to a more sustainable future for our local communities. Minnesota Farmers Union, standing for agriculture, working for farmers. On the web at mfu.org.